So welcome to the Node.js Next 10 meeting for January 16th, 2022. We will go and look at our agenda, although there's not a lot on our agenda this week, so we'll probably spend most of the time looking at the mini summit that we had a few weeks ago. Before I get started, here's the link. I'm just going to post it to there, everybody. If people could add in themselves into the present list so that we know who is here. I'm going to add myself. That would be great. Before we get started, are there any announcements that people would like to share? If not, I think the only thing I'll mention is that if people haven't seen the announcement that the trademark for the Node.js itself was transferred over to the foundation this week. That happened. That's great. Otherwise, we can move on to the other agenda items. The first one was the provide a pre-built Node.js images or cache. Tierney mentioned that there's no major updates this week. Still working to basically get pre-built Docker images that we can just pull down and use to build Node as one of the things to enable easier contributions. But no major update on that this week. The other one we had on the agenda is the technical deep dive, and actually that I think we should just switch over to the summit. So I'm going to maybe replace that with the summit recap and next steps. So let me actually just put that there. So summit recap and next steps, and I'm going to find the issue. Meeting summit. So here's the link if people want to open it up, take a look as well. So there were two major parts, just to catch people up who may not have been able to make it for the whole part. The first part was on modern HTTP. And we workshop in that session what we thought modern HTTP, what the key things were for the project to work on, and we actually landed that. So let me find that as well. I'll put in the link. Doc contributing, maintaining HTTP. So here I'm going to paste this link here as well. Oh, and there I'm going to promote Bradley. So the plan for modern HTTP was captured in that high-level strategy doc in here. I might as well just share it so that it's a little easier for people to see. So we now have this document here, which talks about, that captures the high-level strategy, which we discussed in the mini summit. Some of the key things the current APIs like HTTP1 and HTTP2 are very specific to the protocol. We really want to move towards APIs which are protocol independent so that they can support any one of the HTTP protocols. Similarly, like they shouldn't really be tied to the transports like TCP or QUIC. They should be able to support the different transport protocols. We want good defaults. We want the client and server APIs to be consistent so that, if you're using one, the other ones look familiar. You should be able to do common things like piping from the client API to the server APIs. And we agreed that really we need multiple APIs, probably like, something higher level that if you're just doing some simpler things you can use, and then some lower level ones that give you more control. So if you're really trying to tune performance, you have those extra levers and knobs to be able to do that. We also came to the conclusion that unfortunately our existing APIs don't really meet those. They're widely used. We don't plan to deprecate them, but they're not going to be the focus of future enhanced. We're not going to look to improve them to add other HTTP versions or to improve the performance. They're there, they're widely used, but they'll probably just stay there. We also captured that, like in terms of HTTP, HTTP2 is kind of in maintenance mode. Like it's got some niche usage, but it's not really where we see there's going to be a major uptake. HTTP3 is the more interesting one for future uptake, and HTTP1 is a stable protocol, but there's still value in innovating there in terms of, say, performance or better APIs and that kind of stuff. And so we agreed we should build out 2 APIs, 2 new server APIs, 2 new client APIs in line with that strategy. Transport level things like socket level APIs aren't really tied to the HTTP strategy. We should support different socket level protocols, but that should sort of be the lower level, and one API should support whatever transport you need to use. So specifically for client APIs, we agreed that we should do a fetch-based API on top of Indici, which actually has already landed in experimental, which is great. So this discussion kind of unlocked that. And then the lower level API, we talked about was exposing a subset of Indici, but we weren't ready to just pull in Indici yet. So that's sort of the next core area of like, how do we, once fetch is in and we're comfortable with that, then like the next step is probably to look at that lower level API and figure out like what is a good subset of that to offer that, or maybe something different, but to look at it as a starting point for what that lower level API in the client would be. And then on the server side, we had much less definition, but we were thinking we would align it with the client side API. So it's, once we get through those. And then in the rest of this doc, I just tried to capture some information that we have about the existing APIs. And it's the place where when we add, like, we should probably add in a section now on fetch to talk about where that is and provide whatever guidance we can on that front. So in terms of like next steps for the next 10 team, I think, our effort is around trying to identify and capture what we should do. So I think for the modern HTTP, we might have a pretty good handle on that. I don't know what other people think in terms of, having landed this document for the modern HTTP, is there anything else that we should be, in our team be prioritizing to do at this point?
I seem to have lost your sound. I don't know if it's just me.
You can't hear me?
I can now. I'm not sure if
Okay.
it's me.
No, I could hear the whole time, I think.
Okay, sorry, must have been me.
Okay. Phew, I didn't know how long I was talking with nobody. Everybody just blankly staring. I guess, but Beth, just to repeat, my last sort of question was like, at this point, having landed this maintaining HTTP with our strategy, is there anything else the next 10 teams should prioritize at this point on the modern HTTP front? Or do we think this is, this is a good, like we've sort of got this one in hand and there's a strategy, and maybe once a few more things like we work through we've got, fetch, there's been progress, and once there's low level on the client APIs, we might, when we do a revision, we can come back and say like, are we making progress on this? Just was wondering what people think on that front.
Yeah, my gut is like, it's now on the radar of a lot of the collaborators, the TSC, and also the Indici team are pushing things forward. So maybe like in a 3 months time kind of thing, we should just revisit and see if there's any progress. But in terms of next 10 driving it, I don't see the need right now.
Anybody else thoughts?
Maybe more a question. I don't know. I believe this might have been discussed already, but in terms of process, like, what are we doing, like actively doing to make sure that the people working on HTTP moving forward, like they have in top of their minds that if discussions come up, like they can always revisit the discussions we already had in the next 10 meetings, like. Yeah, how are we kind of planning for that moving forward?
I think you mean like having another session, or just like, obviously the people who are progressing it can modify or change the strategy at any time. The way I'd see, so go ahead.
more of a guidance, right?
Exactly. Like for me, it's good to write down what we think our current state is. So ideally, if people are working on it and they're like, well, wait a second, this doesn't make sense anymore, PR in the changes into this doc. So this doc is a good place to share the current strategy, and we should try and keep it up to date. But it's not a, hey, this can't change at all. It's a, here's our current thought, and it should, the more of an active document we can make it, the better is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I guess my suggestion would be like, let's just make sure that the contributors like working on this,
Yeah.
they have in top of their mind that they can always come and like revisit or just point to this document if whenever discussions came up, right? They can say,
Yep.
oh, you already discussed this. You can look at this here.
Right. So yeah, so this landed. I guess the question is like, it's a good general question of like, we've landed a few of these. Is there things that we should be doing in terms of messaging to the overall collaborators, right?
Yeah, I think we definitely should, right? Otherwise, like people, new people on board start working
Yep.
on some of these things, like they are not even aware these exist.
Okay, so yeah, so let's I'm going to go back to the notes. So plan from armies T. I'm gonna say Michael gave an overview. So just I'm in terms of I'm gonna write this as a second one, but in terms of like the modern HTTP, Beth was like, we're probably on top of that, so we can shift our focus to some other areas. Do you agree kind of with that sentiment? Okay, so that's kind of where I think we are now. We're better defined than some of the others. So agreement that with the doc capturing a strategy, we are probably we are in a decent state on this front for modern HTTP. So we can, no new, so only next step is to plan to revisit in 3 months or something like that. But then I'm going to go on to say, Roy asked about how we make sure collaborators are, one, aware of the strategy and related docs. 2, know they can change, make additions. Anything else in that list? Like, we want them to know they exist. We want them to know they can change them, make additions to them. Any other things that we'd want them to make sure that they know?
Yeah, I guess just a good strategy is also making sure they participate in the upcoming ones, right?
Right.
I think that's the main point. Like, if someone participating in one of these, like, they'll definitely, chances are much higher they will remember this doc
Right.
exists.
Next, 10 and future mini summits. Okay. So go ahead.
There's also something around sometimes some of these documents are more leaning towards certain teams and working groups than others. So is there, the Indici group, should it point to this doc as well? I don't know. I don't know if it should just be referenced from the group so that the smaller groups are aware of it.
Teams docs point to these docs as well.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's a very good point.
It's just kind of thinking, like, from the Indici case, we see that as like quite key to the future of HTTP as this is written. So the Indici project might want to reference it, or just, I don't know if they have meetings, or just bear it in mind.
Right. Yeah, and that's the kind of thing, like, this team could like submit a PR to add the links, right?
Yep.
So we could, that's a good idea. So, okay. Any other ideas like that?
One kind of tangible thing that we could probably do to make collaborators aware would be in the onboarding doc. You work through the onboarding process, just to say, hey, we have a bunch of guides covering, how we contribute to these specific areas. Read through any of them, if you're interested, or need to bear it in mind when you're contributing in one of these areas.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was, as when Royce was talking about that, I think the concrete thing we can do, like, actually, that whole buildup of like, here's the, we have a number of them, so not just this one, but like there's the technical strategy. Sorry, there's the technical values, the technical priorities, and then like some of these specific ones. Having a reference to that in the onboarding would definitely make sense. So I think PR in references, that's like a concrete thing we could do. Are there any other concrete things like that in terms of next actions? That I guess we could look at in Dichi docs, where I'm gonna see if I can spell that right. Nope, sorry, just
FYI, we have an attendee to promote.
thank you. Participants. Okay, well, I'm gonna just write it down and we can. Oops, I'm trying to promote. So Jean, I'm trying to promote you if you can hear us. While I'm trying to do that, any other sort of concrete next actions along that?
Yeah, I don't know if it works the same way as we have previously, but if the Collaborator Summit does go ahead, and I know at the start of the day, there's normally like an introduction type thing. I think addressing everyone there about this effort probably makes sense rather than making it a breakout. I just think it's another opportunity to get in front of everyone who's a contributor or collaborator.
Yeah, okay, so yeah, plan for session, or I don't know what to call that, but for session in the Collaborator Summit at OpenJS World, hopefully cross everybody versus breakout, right?
Yeah, I mean, it might be worthwhile having breakouts, but actually that might be something to consider. Maybe each topic could be a breakout type session or something, but
right, plus breakout sessions. Okay, so I'm not maybe then I've tried to promote Jean a few times, but oh, so Jean said hello there. Oh, I think it finally worked. Yeah, no, so that's definitely a good one. I think you're right that like one of those sessions up front, just to make sure everybody knows this is happening, what the docs are, that they feel, they're not meant to be they're meant to be, this is what we've agreed now. And so it is good, in terms of, hey, we've already got an agreement, but obviously like things change. So if they don't make sense anymore, we need to update them and update them with the new agreement, right? Any other concrete things? We're coming up with some good ideas here, so. I guess the question would be, like, does it make sense to do anything beyond our collaborators in terms of, or is really this is focused on making sure our collaborators know this versus the greater ecosystem.
Kind of think the best way to approach external folks are through the individual topics and to bring
Right.
them in for the individual topics. And I think we did a good job of that in the previous couple of summits.
Yeah. Okay, sounds good. I just wonder, like, say for the HTTP one, does it make sense at all to say, like, somebody write a blog post that we would publish under the Node account saying, you know, we had the summit, here's the strategy that we came up with in terms of HTTP, or is it we've already got the people who are interested involved, and you know, that's.
Yeah, I kind of think it's like more weight should be given to bringing the people in as we're
Right.
writing documents rather than after the fact, but that's just my
Yeah.
gut.
Okay, well, I think we have some good next actions there. Like, we can, you know, I don't know if somebody wants to volunteer to PR in the references to the collaborator onboarding docs, or we can just leave that as a, I might create some issues to do that in the repo, and whoever picks them up can pick them up. So maybe I'll take the action to add these as issues, unless somebody wants to volunteer to pick them up, in which case I might like create the issue too.
I think it's a good idea to add the issues. So yeah, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to drop here, but
Okay.
I'll see you all next time.
Okay, talk to you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so I think we've sort of recapped on the modern HTTP. Actually, I just want to sort of fix my formatting here. So the next section was on documentation. And that's one where there was a very good discussion on some of the things that we thought were key elements. And so you should still be able to see my screen with, and I think I have a summary here. So summary of what we agreed, you know, was to focus on the API documentation versus anything else. Sorry, focus on API documentation, release type documentation. We kind of said everything else, like, you know, how to use Node and, you know, to do a web server, or the things that go into more detail. Those are not necessarily, you know, something that we need to make. There's lots of places that those could be. Those don't necessarily need to be in the Node project itself. We might syndicate those kind of things, like have references to good ones, but it's unlikely that we're going to be able to like maintain a big set of those. There was mentioned we have some good content, so we might keep some content that we already have, but you know, that's not necessarily a focus when we think, you know, it wasn't going to be a focus when we think about documentation. It's really like, what can we do on the API front, and some of the forward-facing documentation, like the release documentation, so people know how to get releases, where they are, all that kind of stuff. There was some agreement in terms of like the API docs, so what is in scope. And really, you know, we agreed we don't need to redocument JavaScript. There's good documentation for there, so it should really be the Node additions on top, and you know, mostly the specs for the API versus anything else. The key things that we'd agreed we thought we should work on was, well, one, we should say, well, what is our strategy? So like, again, back to this, you know, what is our focus? What are we focusing on? So find somewhere where we can capture that says, you know, yes, docs are important, but what does that mean? It means that it's important to have good API docs. Here's what those would look like. And here's what we, you know, what do we want to have in place for documentation? So document that. Part of that is like, we have some metadata in the documentation, but I don't think the consensus there was like, we don't have that well documented. So we'd want to say, well, what is that metadata? Why do we have the data, that metadata? What workflows does it support? So that as we work on the docs, we know why it's there, and we can use that to drive, you know, how we maintain it. Consistency across packages. I see I copied this document metadata twice, but like, again, making sure that one of the key things was like, so that when you look at the different sections, they're consistent. And then the other gap that was discussed was that like, not every API has an example, and that's one of the key things, is to have the example inline so you can see how the API is used in addition to just having defined the methods and the parameters and stuff. It was also discussed it's important to have maybe in some cases more complete explanation for the methods and some better links between concepts. So we, you know, one of the things discussed is you can, you know, you may be trying to use something that's exposed through one API, but it's actually only documented. So for example, if you're doing HTTP and you use a socket, that socket is only really documented under the socket API, but there's not links to help you get there from the HTTP API. So improving the flow for where you're in one part, but really need to be looking at the other part. In terms of our next actions, the ones that were documented was like, figure out where we can document that strategy, and, you know, and the things that we said, like, okay, we want to document that our strategy is that we're going to focus on the API docs, and that API docs should have these things. You know, example, that every method has an example, examples in line. How do we validate that? You know, we talked about how we can validate that they're there so that we know whether we're meeting those goals or not. So that's was sort of a high level recap of the discussion. And I guess the thing we could talk about here is like, okay, what can we do to sort of kick off those next steps?
Yeah, my gut is the document metadata and what it supports could just be in like a to-do issue, like for someone to pick up. The add examples one, I think probably warrants an issue. I don't know if in Node Core or something to say, hey, the next 10 group, which is a small group of people, think it would be valuable to add, you know, an example to every API in the documentation. I think that needs to be a discussion, and having that very specific discussion of should every API have an example, rather than wrapping it into a whole overhaul of like the style of our docs. I think that's a very explicit discussion that can be had. And if we get a solution to it and people say, yes, okay, then work will naturally, you know, start to happen in that area, and people will start PRing all the examples in.
Right. I think what would be good to drive that discussion, because at least my experience is PRs drive engagement, is like, if we can figure out where we would PR that in, and there be a PR open to document that, like, you know, and we can get consensus, like either people will be like, yeah, we should do that, or if the answer is no, then it won't land. But if it does land, then there's like, here's the place where we've captured that is our strategy.
Yeah, I suppose my suggestion is like we approach it from a small addition to the docs for this question, rather than, you know, try and rewrite everything at the same point in time.
Agreed. Like, I think of, you know, the smallest, you know, if let's look at our docs, right? So we've now got these contributing docs. Do we have a doc that we would put that into? Is the starting, like, that would be the simplest starting point, right?
I fear it might be hidden in something like adding a new feature, or, you know, it could be in any one of these guides already, like the contributing guide, or so we might need to figure out, okay, you've got the documentation.
Like, we've got this style guide. The thing is, I'm not 100% sure it's the style guide is the place. Like this, because this applies to API docs and other things, right? But maybe it is still the right place, right? Because like, if people are looking here for like, it is the documentation, like it's, so it could be the right place to just say, you know, every API should have an example.
It might warrant breaking this into a couple of sections, as in like, you know, generic guidance in terms of, you know, what person to write in and grammar and
Right.
things like that. And then another section saying, you know, API documentation requirements. X, Y,
I
and Z.
think that's Tierney was talking. I mean, there's out of the types mini summit, there were some things we wanted to do along those lines. And Tierney had a PR, which actually I think did of some of the things you mentioned. But I also know Rich was talking to him about like trying to get that into smaller pieces. There is this API structure overview. Is this?
Looks like a good place or a correct place.
Yeah. Here's how the node docs work.
I suppose one way would be to PR this to have some like musts, like every API method must have X.
Right. Right. So I guess this doc tools readme. Because yeah, I think you're the larger refactor makes sense, but maybe just getting it in there, like, so then it's like an agreed thing. We could then say, well, okay, if people want to contribute, this is one of the things you can do is to add examples, right? And anyway, it would drive the yes, we agree with that or not kind of thing. So I'm going to just put here PR into so let's say just for now. So every method should have an example. That really seems like one of the main. The other one is like, okay, so create issue to document the metadata, right? So I'm just looking at the
That could kind of be in the same doc, I suppose.
yeah, is that the it does mention some of the YAML here, right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so just maybe more specifics.
Okay, so so what I'll do is I'll create an issue in the next 10 unless somebody else wants to volunteer that to track that work. Because I think that could be done in, like, it doesn't need to be a big bang. It could be like, hey, somebody has a little bit of time. They're going to look at the added metadata and we could add in some documentation of what that is, right? And then, in a separate PR, we could pull in documentation of the next bit of metadata and so forth. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yep.
And then we can just use that issue to sort of discuss how we, track progress and, figure out when we're actually done in the end. Okay, I think those are two concrete, like that, along with, I know the, the fact I know Tierney is looking at a little bit, and hopefully we'll do some more sort of on the main documentation page. I think the idea was to pull in, maybe in a little bit more incremental manner, some of the stuff that came out of the work on types. We may pull some of this stuff into that restructure, but I think it would be good. These are two things we can do in this doc without having to get sort of dependent on that, and does make a lot of sense. And at least start the discussion. So that's good. Any other things like on that documentation front that we think we should think about or plan for in terms of the Okay, I guess those two are some good concrete things we can start looking at. I think then let me go back to GitHub. So next, I think we can talk a little bit about what do we want to dive into in our next meeting. I'm going to look at our issues, and I'm going to look at our labels. So this one, I think we can take out. Okay, so this was covered in the last mini summit. So in terms of issues, we have this one isn't on the agenda, but I'd propose we put this on the agenda just to have it on the list of things we talk about. Does that make sense, Bradley? Is Bradley still with us, or Jean?
No, yeah, it makes sense for me.
Okay, so I'm going to add that to the. So if we think about what we're going to talk about next time, we'll have that on the agenda. Unless, I don't know if you have an update, or there's been, Jean, you have any update on that?
No, not really. Didn't really look on it since last time. So
okay, so yeah, so we maybe can, next time let's plan to have some work on that. Well, this one. I think this is just should be closed. Okay. Right, so these are some of our next steps. I think this one we should put on the agenda just to sort of track our progress on that front as well.
One thing that's just kind of popped into my head. I wonder if it makes sense to make the next 10 effort a strategic initiative. I know that kind of is a bit recursive, but that would force someone to champion it and someone to give updates at the TSC meeting, which I think would, I've seen before that people aren't really aware of what's happening in the next 10 group. And I think at least the TSC should be made aware.
That's a good idea. And it does, if people watch, say, the TSC meetings, it's another way to kind of get the message up there. Yeah, I think, I'd be happy to give updates as a strategic initiative, or if you wanted to volunteer to do that, I think we could That makes a lot of sense to me.
Way of getting some updates to people who probably don't have time to attend this meeting as well as all the other
Yep.
meetings.
Okay, and yeah, and we might get some discussion around the things we're talking about. So yeah, no, I think that makes sense to me. Let's do it. I'm thinking, so then I think so we've got some next steps for sure in terms of, I'm going to create a couple issues, which I'll tag in. The other thing I'm thinking then is we might want to think about like identify the next deep dive, like which technical priorities to deep dive into next. And I'm thinking it seems to have been worked pretty well to do those as mini summits where we've gotten people outside the Next 10 group who are interested in the areas to come in. So I was just thinking here, we could create an issue to say like, in the next meeting, let's brainstorm which are the next 2 topics we should schedule a mini summit for.
And also, when should we schedule it?
Yeah, and we can talk about timing, and so I'll put in that here. So what topics, when? And so if everybody can kind of think about that between now and then, we can probably have a good discussion and close on that, which would be a good idea.
Yes, if you have the URL of the, I think we had a PR with the result of the forms we send to people. Could be great to check on that also.
Which was it?
I don't remember. I'm trying to find it, but I
Like a
don't
doodle.
seem. Yeah.
Did we have a doodle of the next priorities? Here, I'm going to create that, and then I can go back. But,
No, I don't think we had a doodle, but we had the priorities based on the result done by the the last consultation we did to external people.
Right. Yes. Okay. So we go into, I don't know, I'm going to go there to see if this is what you're thinking of. We have our technical priorities documented here. So I'll add the link to that because I think that it would be like choosing which of these is the next thing to look at.
Yep.
Okay.
Have we ever said like an estimated cadence for these, like every 2 months, every 3 months, quarterly?
We haven't discussed that. We've done, I think we had one which was sort of just a more general one, and then we've done 2. And I think, well, we can actually here, we can go and take a look because they are in the meetings. So there is we did November, then January for the actual deep dives.
Okay. Yeah. So the only reason I was wondering is it's possible we want to bear in mind open the collaborator summit and whether some of these topics would be, a good topic to have, in person with a lot of people there or not.
Right. So plans should do some deep dives at OpenJS World.
If it's quarterly, we might squeeze one in before that as well.
Right.
And yeah, it's worth thinking about which ones would make sense to do sooner or virtually versus which ones make more sense to be in person.
Right, to plan the next 2 with one being at OpenJS World. So yeah, so I think what you're suggesting, what I wrote down there is like, it's good to plan the next two. One of those two being at OpenJS World, the other one either being before or after, but like, let's plan those two in the context of we've got that opportunity and which ones make sense to be there versus not.
Yeah, and it's probably worth adding if we can technically feasible, we'd probably try to have anything at OpenJS World open to people virtually as well as in the room. It's sometimes difficult,
Right.
but you know.
Yep. Okay, yeah, no, those are good thoughts. And yeah, I'm kind of just, we can think about it between now and then, but I'm thinking we can maybe squeeze another one in then, because it's 5 months away. No, maybe less.
4.
4. But yeah, we might squeeze another one in and then, but yeah, it's good to look at, well, we can look at the as the next two is kind of like, let's look at them together versus just look at the another one is definitely good. Okay. Well, I think just looking at sort of making it so that the next agenda shows a little bit better what we're going to talk about. Let's see. I guess this was kind of related to that as well, but I'm just going to add a reference to that there too. Anything else we should put on the agenda or? Okay, this I'm going to close because we actually did it. Closing as we move the meeting. Still may not be the best time, but it's hard to find times that work. Okay, we're down to a few minutes. Does everybody think that this is now we've got good things tagged for next agenda and people can think about those between now and then? I guess I'll take silence as a yes. And thanks for everybody for participating. I think we had a good discussion. We've got some concrete actions to move forward with. And we'll see everybody next time.
I
See you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.